Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
It was called a noble experiment, but Prohibition only led to bad liquor, crime, and corruption. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The state of Delaware was a time when small vessels hit the coastal towns to deliver the contraband. It was a time when stills and speakeasies catered to many of those who just wanted a drink. In short, it was the roaring 20s that pitted temperance against the hip flask. Michael Morgan has written a new book about the period entitled Delaware Prohibition, and we have him on the phone this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell me then a little bit about what the situation was in terms of development in Delaware of alcohol and how it began to develop, particularly when it came to like beer and that kind of thing.
Okay. But obviously, it began the colonial period with many home brewers making their own beer. By the 20th century, it was a movement to ban alcohol, and there was because of problems that they foresaw that the poverty in the cities and crime and that sort of thing, and there were local options, particularly in Kent and Sussex County in the beginning of the 20th century, to ban alcohol. Wilmington, however, held out for a time, and then with national prohibition, it was completely banned in Delaware.
So one of the interesting things I found was that alcohol, by particularly three big brewers, they offered as a cure for everything. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, everything from constipation to the secret to perfect health, I think it is.
Yeah, they did say that. One of the brewers, the slogan was that beer is liquid bread, and I think it says more about the state of medicine at that time, because when Prohibition did occur in 1920, there was a big hassle about the medicinal use of alcohol. And eventually it was banned in Delaware. And this was coming off of the flu epidemic of 1918. So many physicians prescribed alcohol for the flu, which didn't cure the flu, but I guess it made you feel better. I don't know.
It made you feel better. That's true. I mean, I guess because I guess this was sort of a common thing, at least for the doctors and the medical industry. I guess didn't like the idea of prohibition or wanted to scale it to at least so they could prescribe it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem with prohibition, it gets complicated with the legal aspects of it. The national law to facilitate prohibition was the Volstead Act, and it didn't specifically ban it for medical purposes. But there were local laws in Delaware that did ban it for medical reasons. So it was a complete ban on alcohol. Delaware's laws were very, very strict. Okay, Maryland's laws were very, very loose, and that earned the title of Maryland the Free State. Now, enforcement of these laws was another matter, because these overlapping laws of federal, state, it required the federal authorities and the state authorities and the local authorities to cooperate, and that was not always forthcoming. And a lot of people did not support prohibition. They when you think about prohibition, you think what the cause of it was to cure some of the problems that were in the big cities, the poverty and the crime and all that. Well, Wilmington was one of the hotbed of resistance to prohibition. So it's a strange thing that happened that way.
So tell me then a little bit about the organizations that supported Prohibition. I understand even the Ku Klux Klan supported Prohibition, which I found sort of interesting.
Yes. Well, their organizations that, wanted prohibition started in the 19th century. There was actually a prohibition party that tried to elect officials that supported prohibition. There was a group that's called the Sons of Temperance, which was very, very strong in Sussex County in the 19th century. The Klan did support prohibition, and the Klan during the 1920s, during the time of basically between I would say 1915 and the beginning of prohibition, was had a resurgence, and it was strong in Delaware. There was Klan meetings in Delaware, so that it was an organization that I guess you would say it was conservative to keep alcohol. And I think their thrust was that they were opposed to changes in society, and that led them to oppose prohibition.
So, give me a sense of the state. So, the sense I get is that the rural areas, particularly in southern, like Sussex County, that they supported this idea, but Wilmington, which is this big city, I guess, relative to Delaware, then opposed it. I mean, is that how the state then split up?
I would say yes. That Wilmington, by and large, opposed prohibition, and the other areas, rural areas, supported it. But then when it came down to nitty gritty, it was sort of like, well, we didn't think you meant beer, and well, we didn't think you meant that we couldn't make it at home, and we couldn't think you could make it for medicinal purposes. So there were all these exceptions. So generally, people did not support prohibition. I mean, even though that the authorities would tout that they had so many arrests and so many speakeasies cut, and so many stills that were discovered, and it was sort of like the body counts in Vietnam. They were touting how effective they were, but then the people on the other end, like in Sussex County, they were supporting the rum runners that were importing the booze from other places.
Well, speaking of the rum runners, the people who were bringing this stuff in, describe a little bit about that and the fact that, when I'm reading your book, I'm reading about Rehoboth Beach and Dewey Beach, Bethany Beach, even Slaughter Beach, beaches that we're all become, of course, familiar with as vacation resorts and places to go. But these were actually places that were prime for bringing this stuff into the coast.
That is correct. The general procedure was that they would load a mothership with booze, either from Canada or perhaps the Bahamas, and a lot of these were sailing vessels, old schooners. One reason was that they were cheap to operate, and sometimes they had to stay offshore until the conditions were right to run things to the beach. And they would have smaller motorboats that would carry the booze to landing places in Delaware Bay and along the coast. These motherships in the begining had to stay in international water, and in early 1920s, international waters began 3 miles away from shore. Well, you can see a vessel 3 miles away from shore quite easily. And the Coast Guard couldn't do anything about them if they stayed in international waters. So what they would do is they would offload these things to smaller motorboats, usually during the night, and the Coast Guard would try to catch them, but they had various tactics to avoid the Coast Guard. In that, at the beginning, the Coast Guard did not have enough smaller vessels to chase them. The other tactic, the other way they got it is they would maybe offload with 3 or 4 motorboats, the rum runners, to run to the beach. Well, one of them would not carry any alcohol, and it would lag behind, so the Coast Guard would come up and capture that one, and they'd say, "Hey, we got nothing." And meanwhile, the other boats would land. Usually, a place where that there were roads that led inland, and this led to the DuPont Boulevard, the DuPont Highway, when that was built, completed in 1923. That made a big difference because the trucks could load up and buzz away into Wilmington without a whole lot of trouble.
So in terms of the people who were making it homegrown, what was that situation like with stills, and what kind of brew did they have?
They did mostly spirits, hard liquor, because it was, once it was done, it was a still. You could do a still in your basement, basically. But most of the rural places, they were in the bushes and the trees, and they did it for their own use, and then the excess they sold, and then the big time operators, were selling it to the people that would carry it to the speakeasies in the cities. They were constantly uncovering these things. I mean, there was a case of one near Roxana, and they even went to Laurel. And there was a photographer named Waller who was known for taking street scenes in and around that area, southern Delaware. And they took him along to take pictures, to document, what they did. And sure enough, they found it. There was a big operation. So they took, Waller took a picture of the whole operation without anyone standing around. And then he moved the agents to pose around the still. He took a second picture, and suddenly gunshots were fired from the bootleggers, and the revenue agents figured that they had enough evidence, so discretion was the better part of valor, and they beat a hasty retreat. So there were some of the things that they found.
Now, what did this look like in terms of the Prohibition officer? I mean, you talk about, as a matter of fact, there's a newspaper series by Edwin Totten. Tell me a little bit about him and what that was like from their perspective.
Right. Edwin Totten was a revenue agent in the first couple years of Prohibition, and then, like you say, he wrote a series of articles. He called it "The Truth About Prohibition," and he detailed his activities and his opinions about what was happening in Prohibition. He generally was supportive of the agents, and he generally, he had stories about his adventures. Sometimes he was shot at, and there was an agent or a bootlegger, a very famous bootlegger named Dapper Dan Collins, who ran liquor up the Delaware River. And at one point, he thought that Edwin Totten thought that he spotted him at Delaware City. He was mistaken. It was a case of mistaken identity. But those were the kind of stories that he told. He believed that for example, in Rehoboth, he believed that the alcohol was consumed in the beach was, as he called it, brought by the hip pocket movement method. That it was not taken directly from the rum runners, but rather they carried small flasks, and the vacationers carried small flasks in their hip pockets to make sure that they had enough for a weekend or a week. So there were not very many like speakeasies in Rehoboth. There were some in Lewis. I think it was more that the stable population of Lewis was enabled them to flourish. Because normally when they arrested people, they popped up in a couple of months, so that they did put a stop to it. Towards the end of Prohibition, for example, there was a big raid at Fenwick Island where they stacked dozens of cases on the beach, and the federal and state police moved in, and when it came to trial, the judge said, "Well," he says, "you got the cases on the beach and then the people on the beach, but you don't show any evidence that these people owned those cases of liquor, so case dismissed." So it was tough for the police to enforce these laws, and it was with the support of the local population. It was easy for the bootleggers to continue to be in business.
There was also, as you indicate, a problem of just simply bad liquor. I mean, there's one instance of a couple that you write about. How common was that?
It was relatively common because, like you say, the alcohol. Sometimes the bootleggers were not too particular about their cleanliness of their stills, and that tended to cause problems. And then sometimes, which was really awful, that they would mix in wood alcohol, which could be deadly. And the Bosley couple that I describe in the book is an example of that. So they had to be, people had to be careful. They had to, it might be an oxymoron, but you had to go to a reputable bootlegger to make sure that you got some good stuff. There was a bootlegger at that time. It was William McCoy, who was known as a high quality bootlegger, and supposedly the phrase the real McCoy came into use because it was a real good liquor.
Now, in the late 1920s, of course, we have Al Smith, who is a wet, that is, for President of the United States against Hoover. Hoover seems to believe that prosperity is due almost entirely to the institution of Prohibition following the war. Tell me a little bit about what the atmosphere was like then.
Yeah, well, in 1928, the atmosphere was good because in terms of the prosperity of the country. As you say, Smith was a wet. He was a New Yorker, a big city guy, and Hoover was the incumbent and was riding the prosperity, and he was victorious. So the Prohibition continued, but just shortly after that, a year after that, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression came about, and the popular attitude toward Prohibition tipped over in that if Prohibition was designed to end poverty and the broken homes and crime, and people after 10 years of it say, well, wait a minute, that those things aren't being cured, they're worse, and in effect you've created a disrespect for the law. So the attitude was that Prohibition, like you said, it was a noble experiment, but it didn't work. It was a major change in attitude, in the public attitude for against Prohibition, and very quickly they did away. They passed a constitutional amendment to do away with prohibition, and even the Delaware they did away with the local laws that prohibited alcohol.
By the way, amongst the bootleggers, you described there's a certain fraternity that existed between them, and how the two, at least, try to avoid the prohibition of officers.
Right. There was, I wouldn't say so much cooperation, because there was some rivalry in terms of territorial, of dominance in terms of keeping their customers. But by the same token, though, the bootleggers were all trying to avoid the authorities, and therefore if they swapped stories about how they avoided people, we believe they did that. I mean, the problem with studying the bootleggers is that any nefarious activities, the illegal activities, you don't usually leave a lot of written records around to incriminate you. So a lot of this comes from people like Totten, who tells stories about how things were. So, but there was basically certain honor among thieves that permeated the bootlegger fraternity.
Now, they also describe a good deal of corruption, not only at the local level in terms of local officials and people, but did that also go to the prohibition officers as well, or what was that relationship like?
Yeah, there was some corruption. Of course, again, Totten, the fellow who wrote those newspaper articles, claimed there wasn't a whole lot. But I think there a lot of it that was normally looking the other way. But there was attempted briberies, and there was a case in the Coast Guard station at along the coast, Bethany, was approached one of the officers, and he turned them down. I mean, so that is reasonably well documented. There were some police officers that were arrested for being in cahoots with the Wilmington police officers that were in cahoots with the bootleggers, the rum runners, and the police forces at that time were, I would say, freewheeling. And not as the professionals that we have today, because that was the 20th century development. I mean, police forces were an institution that were constantly developing. So yeah, there was some bribery, there was some looking the other way, and there were cases of being basically in cahoots with the bootleggers.
By the way, here we go. You talk about a new sheriff in town, that Harold Three Gun Wilson. Tell me a little bit about him, and particularly, I mean, as I understand it, Wilmington had something like 168 saloons before Prohibition. They had 500 after, in terms of speakeasies. Tell me a little bit about him. You're
right. Harold Three Gun Wilson is what I like to say is that he was a combination of Billy Sunday and Elliot Ness. He was from Kansas. His first job as an agent was in Massachusetts, and he firmly believed there was a moral obligation to root out liquor wherever it was found. And unfortunately, he found it in a hotel that was having a party with high-ranking Massachusetts politicians. There were some arrests made. The governor was sort of implicated but not arrested. And Three Gun Wilson was banned. They kicked him out of Massachusetts for a while. They was called Three Gun Wilson. There's various stories about why he was called that. The one quick one is that he always carried a gun, and someone presented him with two other guns, a brace of pistols, and he said, "Well, I'm going to carry these two also." So he was known as Three Gun Wilson, and he believed that you should grab the what they call the person selling hooch by the nape of the neck and the seat of the pants and throw him into jail where he belongs, and that was his attitude. Well, after he got kicked out of Massachusetts, he spent about 10 years, writing about Prohibition, and then he became a Prohibition agent for Delaware, and that was the new sheriff of town, and he wanted to clean up Delaware. He made a number of raids throughout the state. He formed what he called public information committees to try to get people to report the activities of bootleggers, basically to spy on your neighbor to see who he's doing, what they were doing, and he said you always could see someone who was a bootlegger or a rum runner. He called them filthy, lazy desperados who's commercialized liquor. So he was a straight talker, straight shooter, I guess. But he came at the end of Prohibition, and I don't think, although he made a big splash, I don't think he did much to really stop the flow of liquor into Delaware.
So you talk at the end about bootleg chickens. What's that about?
Oh, bootleg chickens, yes. Okay. Well, what happened is the chicken market, well before Delaware got really involved in the chicken market, there was always a great deal of competition in basically New York City, and it was gangs infiltrated the market. And when Delaware in the 1920s became a breeding ground for chickens, then that involved some Delaware people. And during Prohibition, many of the local folks learned how to evade the authorities to get the bootleg liquor to market, and they eventually did that with chickens. In that during World War II, the chickens were not rationed as were other meats and things, but they were price controlled, and therefore people were willing to pay more than the regulated price, so that the authorities tried to stop the chickens from being shipped to Delaware to basically New York City and I guess Philadelphia and others, but particularly New York City. And the people of Delaware, the truckers of Delaware, started to revert to their old back road uses of to avoid the checkpoints. They were checkpoints along the principal roads, the DuPont Highway, as there were in Prohibition, to stop trucks to check for liquor. The same thing happened during World War II, but they weren't going for liquor; they were going for chickens.
Well, we've been speaking with Michael Morgan. He's written a new book about the Prohibition period called Delaware Prohibition, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this morning.
Okay, I'm glad to be on.
Okay, this has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.